Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me.
Good day and welcome again. As I went on my daily walk yesterday up the hill to Alexandra Palace, a beautiful view overlooking London awaited me when I reached the top. And I thought of Psalm 36, verse 5. Your steadfast love, O Lord, extends to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Now, the hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness, is actually based on this psalm. Now, for how many of you is this a favorite hymn? Well, it's one of my favorites. I remember not so long ago on BBC Songs of Praise program, it came fourth in the nation's most popular hymns. Of course, it has been sung in many churches on different occasions, weddings, anniversaries, funerals, glad days and sad days. The hymn, of course, was written by an American, Thomas Chisholm, and Thomas knew what it was to face great disappointment in his life. He was a journalist and was used to having to cover some really sad stories in his paper. Must say that is one of the unfortunate things with some journalists, isn't it? They think we would rather read bad news than good news. Perhaps because they think good news isn't really news. People expect things to go well, don't we? It's only when something goes horribly wrong that the story hits the newspapers and media outlets. Well, you can just consider what is happening now with the coronavirus pandemic. The bad news, day in and day out. Must admit, bad news can become overwhelming. Thanks to those journalists who encourage us with good news stories of positive things happening even in the midst of the current circumstances. Do you know, after Thomas Chisholm spent many years as a journalist reporting bad news, he felt he wanted to spend his life telling people the good news of God's love. And so he gave up his job as a journalist and offered to become a Methodist minister. To his great joy, of course, he was accepted for training, and after years of study, he began his ministry in a small church, where he instantly became very well known. He was a good preacher, as well as a conscientious pastor. But within a year, tragedy struck. He was taken ill and sadly had to give up the ministry. Yet he could still write, and so he wrote, Great is thy faithfulness, based on Psalm 36, praising the steadfast love of God through good days and bad, in sickness and in health. Now, do these words sound familiar? In sickness and in health? Words where love is promised, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. The words of the marriage service, of course. Now, this past week on BBC News, I read about a very inspiring story of a married couple, Michael and Mary, who contracted the coronavirus, and how the love they shared was instrumental in their survival. Let's just listen to a short recount of their story, which my wife will share.
Michael and Mary are both in their 60s. Michael was recently diagnosed with lung cancer, and Mary has severe asthma. They were both taken by ambulance to the hospital as they contracted COVID-19, and Michael especially was struggling to breathe. When admitted to the hospital, the medical staff asked Michael that dreaded question about his wish for resuscitation should he take a turn for the worse. Michael told them if things did get worse and there was no way out, then yes, no resuscitation. But when he spoke with his wife Mary about this, she said, "You don't say that." Mary didn't want to give up on her husband that quickly, and Michael changed his mind. As Michael was getting very ill, his family thought he was going to die. His breathing was getting worse and worse. This is when their son made a request to the hospital. He asked them repeatedly if the couple could stay together with beds next to each other. He knew how much they would worry about each other, as they hadn't been apart since they were teenagers. Finally, the hospital gave in to their son's request and placed Michael and Mary in the same ward with beds next to each other. And this was a turning point. Things were beginning to change for the better. It's clear that Michael and Mary lifted each other's spirit up, and now they are looking forward to the day when they will be well enough to go home and live together again. They have their 48th wedding anniversary to celebrate in September.
Human love, my friend, is intended to be as steadfast as the love of God, who, as Isaiah expresses it, loves us as much as a good man loves his wife, and vice versa. Whatever happens, nothing should ever be allowed to disturb our faith in a God who loves us like that. But that's a hard thing to say at this time, isn't it? Especially when we see the heart-rending pictures and read about what the coronavirus is doing to people's lives. We can't help asking, my God, why should such terrible thing be happening? Already, some people have sought to find logical and theological answers to the crisis. Others point to blaming others. And there would be those who blame God and say, why couldn't God have made a more perfect world where disease and pain was never felt? I must confess I don't know how to answer those questions. None of the answers people give satisfy me. I can only respond by asking not why has such a thing happened, but what can I do about it? How can I help people still to believe in the steadfast love of God in the present circumstances? Only by showing them that there still is love in the world, love expressed by those who give of themselves to come to the aid and relief of people in their distress or grief, people whom they may not even know, but who are members of our great human family. I have to admit that I quite understand those who think that we religious people are foolish when we think we can defend God for apparently allowing such tragedies to happen. I can only know that in the face of such appalling suffering, I feel a deeper need of God and can only respond with prayer for those who suffer. I would rather leave the arguments to others and just light a candle for those who have been affected or bereaved or buried. I often remember a text my beloved mother in the faith had hanging on her wall at her home. It reads, "Hushed will be every question, how and why, and you in humble gratitude shall bow, thankful you trusted when the path was dim. thankful your faith was strong to follow him. Oh, thanks be to God for those reassuring words in times of distress and grief.